Hello, my name is Lakshmi and my project topic is disparity in lead poisoning among African American children under 6 years of age in Michigan, USA. First, about the background on lead poisoning. Lead poisoning occurs when lead builds up in the body, often over months or years. In January 2012, CDC has set elevated blood lead levels of more than 5 microgram per deciliter as level of concern. The overall prevalence of lead poisoning has increased in USA. However, African Americans still experience a disproportionate burden of lead poisoning and lead toxicity. And this disparity is reflected on comparing four counties in Michigan: the Wexford, Wayne, Clare, and Livingston counties. And these counties have different racial and socioeconomic demographics. On comparing the four counties, Wayne County has highest prevalence of lead poisoning, and Wayne County has the highest number of African Americans among the four counties. Within Wayne County, Detroit City, with predominant African American population, is affected most. Higher poverty rates, unemployment, food deserts, limited access to health care are all contributory factors. However, social determinants alone cannot explain the persisting disparity. Clare County, with predominant white population, have comparable socioeconomic factors to Wayne County and Detroit City, but the prevalence of lead poisoning in Clare County is 0%. This explains the impact of residential segregation as a major contributor to the disparity. Oppression and racial segregation embedded into the history of Detroit, as seen by the Detroit Wall, still separates blacks and whites in the city. This chart shows the current conditions regarding lead poisoning in Michigan. The first chart demonstrates how Wayne County is still disproportionately burdened, while the other three counties have attained 0% of lead poisoning by the year 2015. And the second chart shows the population demographics, and Wayne County has higher number of African Americans and Detroit City has 82.7% African American population. The third chart shows that how Wayne and Clare County have higher poverty rates in comparison to the other two counties. This chart shows that the Wayne County has the highest number of pre-1950 housing units among the four counties in Michigan. Now the problem statement. Even minimal amount of lead exposure can cause serious health problems. Lead mainly affects the brain and neurological system, and since children under 6 years have still growing brains and growing nervous system, they are the most vulnerable age group. And at higher levels, lead poisoning can even be fatal. Lead poisoning results in decreased IQ, neurological and behavioral problems which are irreversible, so it's important to mitigate the sources of lead exposure. 2-year-olds with elevated blood levels in 2014 were expected to experience a loss in lifetime earnings of $171 million, and 10% of juvenile crimes in Michigan are associated with lead exposure. This chart shows how racism and institutionalized racism leads to residential segregation and leads to adverse social determinants like higher poverty rates, lack of education, unemployment, food deserts, older homes, inaccessibility to quality medical care, leading to different risk factors and risk behaviors, resulting in higher prevalence of lead poisoning among African Americans and overall increased mortality. And the target or goals are to ensure elimination of existing disparity in prevalence of lead poisoning. And some of these goals include ensuring adequate data collection and use of data to identify high-risk population, ensuring access to quality health care, health education and awareness, identify and address socioeconomic factors, implement social justice strategies, improve housing conditions, mitigate water, soil, and air sources of lead exposure, stringent follow-up on monitoring services, focus on community engagement and feedback, partnering with different organizations, adequate response tracking, and ensuring adequate funding. And this slide shows the proposed countermeasures. And first, as a social justice principle, we should focus on mitigating racism and racial segregation still persisting in Michigan. And the Michigan Civil Rights Commission was set up in response to the Flint water crisis in Michigan, and it focused on eliminating racism and segregation through replacing Michigan's emergency manager law, developing a plan of action to provide environmental justice, and developing a deeper understanding of the role of structural racialization and implicit bias. And next is the social justice strategies, which include strategies to mitigate lead exposure and the effects of lead poisoning. Child Lead Air Poisoning Elimination Board submitted their final report in November 2016, which led to the implementation of their guidelines and setting up of a permanent Child Lead Poisoning Elimination Commission in Michigan. And some of their guidelines include 100% screening of children for uh, blood lead levels and utilization of data to identify high risk areas, providing follow up and monitoring services for households where there are identified cases of lead poisoning, and preventing environmental lead exposure through home, soil, and water and product exposure mitigation activities. And another important uh, strategy is the low income housing tax credit development in Detroit. It was enacted as a part of Tax Reform Act of 1986. The Low Income Housing Tax Credit Program provides federal tax credits for low income rental housing owners and investors instead of providing direct development subsidies. And it now gives states the equivalent of nearly $8 billion in annual budget authority to issue tax credits for the acquisition, rehabilitation, or new construction of rental housing targeted to lower income households. Low income housing tax credit helps build affordable housing units and have resulted in rehabilitation of over 6,000 housing units and produced over 5,000 new housing units in Detroit. Improved housing conditions have shown an overall betterment of socioeconomic status, employment conditions, and neighborhood conditions. Better and newer housing units eliminated the greater risk factor for exposure to household lead and lead poisoning. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to hearing all of your presentation.